But I know that all you guys are suspicious lot, I know from experience. And I know what you're thinking. Sometime last year, Nick Dallas probably walked into Dean Kalimniou's Turek Road legal office. From a distance, it appeared that he was working, but he could have been working on his next Diatribe article or his next Facebook response. And entering the office, he probably shirt-fronted him and said, Dean, next year you're going to speak on Nikolaos Plastiras. Because he can speak about any topic under the sun. Now, let me give you the other side of the story, because you shouldn't be jumping to conclusions, because, that behavior, if it's not bullying, if it's not conflict of interest, some would argue might call for suspension of one's GCM membership or even expulsion from the board. Yes, I'll be honest, I did attend his office, but no untoward pressure was applied. It was just a polite suggestion. I repeat, a polite suggestion. Would you like to do this topic? And Dean, being the affable and philosophal guy that he is, he said, I'd love to do it. I mean, he even followed up and said, that's such a great idea, I'll buy you lunch. So that's the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Έτσι δεν είναι Κωνσταντίνη, καλά δεν τα λέω. Okay. But seriously now, one of the aims of this seminar series is to cover gaps in Greece's history. Periods that haven't been covered before, individuals that haven't been covered before, and it's very easy to cover the popular, well-known names like Venizelos and so forth. But only Dean has that knack of covering less well-known figures. Last year was Themistoklis Sofoulis was correct. This year's Nikolaos Plastiras. And I'm very personally proud for him that he's done that, because I actually, in the last few years, have approached a few Greek academics to deliver this talk, and I was turned down, because in the end, you still have to put the work effort behind the scenes. You have to make an effort to collect the data, do the research, and present something like this. So I think overall, we should be proud generally of a community here in Australia. We might be 20,000 kilometres away, but we can do some pretty damn good sort of research. We've got a critical mass of sort of very talented individuals. I mean, Dean's one of the stalwarts. We've got impressive historians from almost every state of Australia, from John Yanakis in Perth, you've got Alexander Delios in Canberra, Andreko Vardava, in Adelaide, Doni Peperoglou here, Nick Demanas from Sydney, who's now sort of Chicago. We also have a new generation of scholars coming through. Olympia Nelson just submitted a PhD last week. Good to see Dr. Themistoklis Kritikakos in the background, who next week we've got his book launch on the Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian genocide. So make sure to come to that. It's on a Tuesday, but there's also 7 on Thursday as well. And then there's also other younger candidates in the wings, like who are doing honours, have just finished honours, like Dean Kondos and so forth. And one of the aims of this series has actually been to sort of promote these candidates and give them an opportunity to present their work to a larger audience. So it makes my work easier by having such a large field to sort of draw from. And we're sort of quite fortunate in our community that we've got such talented people. Okay, well, you all know Dean. There's no need for me to introduce him. He's sort of always here assisting us. So I'll give the podium to Dean. A big round of applause for our speaker tonight. Dean Kalimniou, speaking on Nikolaos Plastiras.
Thank you, Nico. Kalispera σας. Lovely to see you all here. Tonight, we're going to look at a general, and Greek generals are generally the epitome of macho, and yet you see him here, and Plastiras was one of those people who would not take a decision without consulting a kafedzu. He was very superstitious. It's one of the anecdotes of his life, and gives an insight into his character, because What I'd like you to have in the back of your mind when we're going through everything tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is this. To what extent can martial virtue reconcile with democratic ethics and morality? Can a soldier's life be transferred intact into parliamentary governance? Can personal integrity compensate for institutional fragility? Yeah? Can revolutionary legitimacy transition into stable constitutional authority? And when you consider that, consider the whole military history of Greece and how at different times in modern Greek history, the army saw itself either as the, if you like, guardian of the constitution or the guardian of the state, and to what extent is it justified for an army to intervene in the, if you like, political life of a country. In Turkey, they do it all the time with your various coups. In Greece, it was done many times where the army intervened supposedly to protect democracy with varying results. And let's just discuss that. And Plastiras, of course, an individual who is considered to be one of the most incorrupt, one of the most self-sacrificing of Greek members of public life. A Roman Cincinnatus, if you will. You know, Cincinnatus was the Roman who was taken out of retirement to go and assume control of Rome to fight off an invasion, and then as soon as he finished, he laid down his powers, buggered off and went home. Is Plastiras the Greek Thessalian Cincinnatus? Questions that I want you to think about while we're having a bit of a chat about this. He was born in 1883 in Vounesi, which is today called Morphovouni, in the mountainous district of Agrafa of Thessalia, about 20 k's from where my grandfather was born, also in Karditsa. His father, Konstantinos, was a smallholder, so he didn't come from an important or politically connected family. Part-time builder, family settled in Karditsa, where he completed his schooling. And it is said that the rugged environment and the austerity of the family contributed to his own frugality and personal austerity. He was one of the few Greek politicians to die in poverty. Yeah, and that austerity was central to his public image. Yeah, local newspapers such as Eleftheria, when he died in 1953, would recall that he lived as he was born, simply, sparingly, without ostentation. A member of the ruling class, as we understand it, he was not. Enlists voluntarily in the Greek army in 1904, where he joins the 5th Infantry Regiment in Trikala, and like many of his generation, he was motivated by the lingering humiliation of the 1897 Greco-Turkish War, which was mainly fought in Thessalia, and by the hope of national redemption. So he was one of those people who wanted to see Greece set on a proper footing with borders which he felt would be commensurate with the national aspirations of the Greek people. He took part in the Makedoniko Agona, the Macedonian struggle, serving in irregular operations under the command of Konstantinos Mazarakis Enian, whose descendant gave a lecture here last year on this very podium. And he was operating in Yanitsa. And these campaigns were against, obviously, the Bulgarians and the Turks, and gave him his first experience of decentralized command, because he's fighting out there in the guerrilla war, and also of intertwining politics and war, which is always a difficult thing. When the Epanastasis to Goudi, the military coup of Goudi, took place in 1909, Plastiras was a young non-commissioned officer. He was not a conspirator, but he benefited from the League's reforms and from the arrival of the great Eleftherios Venizelos, whose vision of a disciplined meritocratic army rather than an army based on power and patronage deeply impressed him. So in later interviews, for example, in the newspaper Makedonia, notably 1950, he called Venizelos the restorer of faith in the uniform. Yarra trams and metro trains take note. During the Balkan Wars, 1912 to 1913, he serves as a second lieutenant in the Archipelago Division, and he fights in Epirus and Macedonia. At the Battle of Bizani in February of 1913, he displayed notable personal bravery. He led a detachment through enemy lines under heavy fire, and his commander's report to Army headquarters commended his, and I quote, in translation, exemplary composure and moral ascendancy over his men. His men loved him, and he was a born leader. It was around about this time that the soldiers and journalists began to call him O Mavros Cavalaris, the Black Horseman, nickname referring to his dark F-zone uniform, the black horse he rode at the front, and that remained associated with him for the rest of his life. A lot of people I spoke to, elderly members of the community, told them I'm doing this lecture tonight. They said, oh, Mavros Cavalaris. And this is how many years after his death? After the wars, we know Greece doubled in size. Victory was followed by internal division, as it always does when you are Greek. The national schism of 1915 to 17 split the army between royalists and Venizelists, and Plastiras, confirmed Venizelos, joined the Ethniki Amina, the provisional government of national defense, in Thessaloniki in 1916. Venizelos left Athens, went to Thessaloniki, said to the king, no. This is the legitimate government. You are not the legitimate government, and Greece was split in two. He commanded a company on the Macedonian front, taking part in the final Allied offensive of September 1918 that broke the Bulgarian lines. And the French dispatches from General Franchet d'Espery cited him for steadfastness and initiative, but he said that, or wrote that, Marlon, in a French accent. Following the armistice, Plastiras rose rapidly through the ranks, and in early 1919 was given command of the 5/42 F-zone regiment under Allied orders. Greek troops were sent to southern Ukraine as part of the anti-Bolshevik expedition. There was a Greek contingent. Here he is with Venizelos, and here he is with his Greek contingent in southern Ukraine. This was Venizelos' great idea of getting brownie points with the Allies in order for them to tick off his aspirations in Asia Minor. The whole idea was, just like Howard with the Iraq War, we'll send troops up north, and we will collaborate with the Allies, and then you will do nice things for us. They operated around Odysseus, Chersona, Nikolaev in conjunction with the French forces. It was a complete debacle. They didn't know the terrain. The locals were hostile. They had no idea what they were doing. Plastiras' regiment stood out because it was one of the last units to embark and the last to withdraw. And French reports praised the discipline of his army and the troops under his control as opposed to other units. But the campaign was a strategic failure. The Red Army advanced rapidly. Allied troops evacuated Odessa, but his composure during the evacuation was something which really enhanced his standing. His regimental diary records that he personally supervised the embarkation of civilians and wounded soldiers, an episode later recalled by the journalist Dimitrios Fotiadis as evidence of his, as he says, cold courage, and order amid disintegration. So after Ukraine, this F-zone regiment that he was commanding was redeployed to Asia Minor, forming part of the 1st Army Corps. And by this stage, he had been promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. His leadership style, again, combines paternal care with austerity, and one regimental order preserved in the Army History Directorate writes, this is him, the soldier's honor is the officer's mirror. He who dishonors himself dishonors his flag. So that gives you an insight into the ethical code that underpinned his authority. Duty was moral before it was strategic. I'm sure he was unbearable to be around when he was talking about all these moral things, but there you go. Now, when Plastiras landed in Smyrni, in Asia Minor. Greece, as we know, stood at the zenith of its territorial ambitions. The Allied occupation of Western Anatolia, sanctioned by the various treaties, seemed to promise the realization of the Megali there, but the campaign, obviously, we know, would reveal the chasm between imperial vision and logistical reality. Plastiras' regiment was posted along the river Meandros, now Menderes, and later near Aydin, Aydinio, and Dushak, and reports from the Hellenic Army's historical service describe his group as a model of discipline and a cohesion amid an army already fraying under the weight of politics. Yeah? Plastiras enforced strict rules against looting and reprisal, and violations by regular auxiliaries appalled him. And in his daily order of 17th June 19, he said, "The Greek flag cannot march alongside dishonor." It's a phrase which is preserved in many archives and many sources. And he was known by the Turks because of his black mustache as Karabiber, black pepper. Now, he's there doing that, and in the meantime, in November 1920, the elections brought back the royalists to power, and Venizelos went into exile, and many Venizelos officers were dismissed, because that's what would happen in those days. If you were not Toukomatos, you would lose your job. The War Ministry ordered Plastiras' removal, but his men petitioned for his retention and threatened to resign en masse. A dispatch from the commander of the 1st Army Corps to Athens on the 22nd of December 1920 notes an atmosphere of devotion to Colonel Plastiras unparalleled in the army. He was really popular. They loved him. The government relented, which is amazing. From that point, his name carried immense moral weight among the officer corps, far beyond his rank. Sir Percy Lorraine, visiting the Smyrna front when he was still there in 1921, describes him as a soldier of antique simplicity, the only man here who seems untouched by vanity. Now, 1921, the front extends hundreds of kilometers into Anatolia, and then there's the Battle of the Sangario, the Sakarya River, which proves decisive. The Greek forces advance to within sight of Ankara. Their supply lines are stretched thinner and thinner and thinner. They're being dragged in by the strategy of Kemal Atatürk. And Plastiras' regiment then forms part of the left flank near Eskişehir, fighting stubbornly in the rear guard actions during the withdrawal, because the front broke and then the Greek army started to withdraw, and eventually that withdrawal became an evacuation and a complete rout. General Staff's official Ekthesis Periton Epichiriseon singles him out for exceptional leadership under conditions of exhaustion and encirclement. And it was here that his men started referring to him as Kapitan Nikolaos rather than Colonel Plastiras, showing exactly how they felt about him. Now, by 1922, defeat is imminent. Kemal Atatürk's summer offensive shatters the Greek line. Plastiras' division covers the retreat of the remnants of the First Army and does so steadfastly and without panicking, which is what most of the other Greek army divisions did. British liaison officer they came to watch, H.C. Smart, wrote in his dispatch of the 30th of August that among the few officers who retained control of their formations, Colonel Plastiras is conspicuous. At Alasehir, his regiment escorted thousands of refugees and wounded to the evacuation port of Chesme, and then, as we know, the destruction of Smyrni followed. Collapse of the Asia Minor campaign was not only a military disaster, but it was also a national trauma. We know that between 1 and 1.5 million refugees landed in Greece. Public anger turned to hysteria. On the 11th of September 1922, a group of Venizelos officers, Chios and Lesvos, among them Colonel Plastiras, Colonel Stylianos Gonatas, Commander Dimitris Fokas, proclaim the Revolutionary Committee, and they demand the abdication of the king, punishment of those responsible for the defeat, political renewal. and the uprising spreads with astonishing speed. Warships sailing to Piraeus, flying the revolutionary flag, and by 15th September, the government of Petros Protopapadakis had resigned. King Constantine advocates in favor of his son, King George, and leaves for exile. Plastiras enters Athens at the head of loyal Levzones. To delirious applause from the crowd, a stern figure on horseback, silent amid the shouts of deliverance, as the newspaper Estia describes him. And he's an interesting fellow because everyone is cheering him on as him and his mates are processing through Athens to take over the government. And according to Penelope Delta, he turned to a few people as saying, "Why are you guys cheering? We lost. Our country is destroyed." Which possibly gives you the indication that it wasn't about power, and he really thought that as a military officer, it was his calling to save the nation. Again, we return to that question. To what extent is that permissible in a democracy? So the revolutionary government, which is formed by Plastiras and Gonatas, was not only ad hoc, but also very determined. Principal aim was accountability. On 12th of October, it orders the arrest of the 6 leading royalist politicians and generals, Gounaris, Protopapadakis, Stratos, Baltazis, Theotokis, Hadzianestis, who were involved in the Asia Minor debacle and were accused of criminal negligence. Prince Andrew fled. Surprise, surprise, the grandfather of the current artist formerly known as Andrew. Like grandfather, like grandson, I don't know. There was no Pizza Express in downtown Athens back then. The subsequent trial of the 6 opens up on the 31st of August 22 before an extraordinary military tribunal. And where are they? Okay, some of these are out of kilter. That's the entering Athens under the coup. This is the trial of the 6. And the verdict is death by firing squad, was carried out at Ludi on the 15th of November. Now, historians remain divided about Plastiras' role. He was the head of the Revolutionary Committee, yes. He bore ultimate legal responsibility for the decisions, but contemporary testimony indicates that he hesitated to approve the executions. According to witness Colonel Dimitris Economou, he spoke of a duty to justice, not vengeance, but finally yielded to the army's rage. So he mulled and struggled over this decision. Should we really be killing them? Is our job retribution or is it justice? The executions had the effect of deepening Greece's divisions. The French High Commissioner in Athens, Charles de Saint-Quentin, reported to Paris that the colonel is a man of honor, trapped by forces he cannot control. I know that's my excuse for everything I do. But also his revolutionary regime achieved a decent amount of constructive reforms, repatriated 250,000 refugees, reorganized the disintegrating army. Remember, the front broke, the army was in disarray. Negotiated the Lausanne Armistice of 1923, which means that we got to keep Western Thrace because the Turkish army was going to take over Western Thrace, and they could have done it. Formalized also the population exchange. Plastiras' correspondence with Venizelos, here he is on a stamp, preserved in the Benaki Museum, reveals a sense of weary responsibility. The homeland has survived, but without joy. We saved the body, but not the soul. It's one of the few indisputable personal remarks of his recorded in Venizelos' private papers. Now, this revolution's dual legacy, justice and trauma, defines him thereafter. For his supporters, he was the man who restored order to chaos, and you know, order is one of those words that the army bandies around a lot. Purged the corrupt monarchy, albeit for a little while. For his detractors, he was a military dictator who sanctioned judicial murder. So you've got the two sides of the coin there. Now, the philosopher Ioannis Theodorakopoulos, writing in Estia in 1946, observes that in the figure of Plastiras, the Greek conscience sought expiation for Smyrni. The remark captures, I think, the psychological dimension. He became less of a politician than a moral cipher through which Greece attempted to interpret its catastrophe. And you know, people instinctively trust people that have big moustaches. Stalin, Plastiras, General Curvy Tash in the Tintin comics. Yeah. So by the spring of 1923, exhaustion and diplomatic pressure forced the revolutionary government to dissolve. Plastiras resigns and retires from the army in January 1924 with the honorary rank of Lieutenant General. His final communique to his troops closes with the phrase, "The soldier's duty ends where peace begins. His vigilance, never. In other words, we're watching you." Capsulates both his ethos and his dilemma. How do you remain vigilant without again resorting to arms? Now, the events of 22-23, thus, in my opinion, encapsulate that paradox. Soldier of pure conscience becomes a man of political responsibility. He is the embodiment of heroic integrity, a democrat brought to power through a coup, which is not democratic, and he would refer to those months later on as the time when the sword burnt the hand that held it. So he was very, very cognizant of this dilemma. It wasn't as if he was unconsciously doing this and we're drawing the conclusions. He struggled with these concepts throughout his professional life. So when he retires, Greece was a republic in formation with a society in trauma. The Asia Minor disaster did what it did. Chaos, repatriation, hurt feelings, the idea of a society which is struggling to find itself, define itself after the loss of its aspirations. But he remains, even having left the army, a symbol of moral vigilance during those fragile early years of the Second Hellenic Republic, which lasts from 24 to 35. So the revolutionary committee that he and Gonatas led dissolves after supervising the transition to a civilian government. So they were not about power for power's sake. They did preside over elections. How fair and free they were, historians can argue over. How fair and free are elections that armies conduct? Would they allow people who are not possibly favoured by them to win? Also questions. But both of these men, the two generals, refused permanent office. They argued that the army should return back to the barracks. The new parliament votes to depose King George II and proclaim the republic. And Plastiras, while no longer in government, was instrumental in establishing the Refugee Settlement Commission under the League of Nations. He was working with Henry Morgenthau Sr., and I encourage you all to look up Henry Morgenthau Sr. He was an American ambassador who was in Constantinople at the time that the genocide was taking place, and he met the triumvirate of the Young Turks, and recorded in his diary every single thing that they told him to justify the genocide of the Greeks, the Armenians, and the Assyrians. And he wrote a book about it, Ambassador Morgenthau's Story. And after the war, he suggested that Turkey should be partitioned. And after the Second World War, his son, Henry Morgenthau Jr., suggested that Germany should be partitioned. Listen to the Morgenthau's. So he started working with him to repatriate all of the refugees. Over the next decade, the Refugee Settlement Commission constructed more than 50,000 homes and redistributed agricultural land across Macedonia, Thessaly, and Thrace. Victorian government, are you listening? And the Commission's archives repeatedly cite his insistence that refugees be treated as citizens, not as clients of political parties. And this was a program which was largely carried out by Venizelist governments, stabilising rural Greece, creating a new social base for republicanism. And his republican ideals were more moral than constitutional. He believed that political corruption led to the military collapse of 1922. He believed that the state's first duty was to restore integrity. That couldn't happen under a king. His letters to Venizelos in 25 and 26, which are preserved, and you can read them, argue that education, administrative reform, land redistribution should precede industrialization. And he urged the Prime Minister, this is interesting, to keep the army politically neutral, warning that if officers become agents of parties, discipline will perish. Interesting. And then there's him with his mum. There's him writing things. There's him sporting a mustache. People trust older men with mustaches. Except for this guy, Pangalos. Not Mazita Fagame Pangalos or Papuso Pangalos, yeah? Which his dictatorship briefly interrupts all these things that these people were trying to build. Plastiras condemns Pangalos from retirement, describing his regime as the tyranny of mediocrity. Feel free to use this phrase when you're commenting on various aspects of our communal life here. Not in this building, elsewhere. But when Pangalos fell, Plastiras declined offers to join the interim government of General Kondylis, demonstrating the same reluctance to profit from upheaval that had marked his behavior in 1922. So much for that. Now, Venizelos returns to power. Here he is with our good friend Kemal. Kalinniou Kemal, αυτός ο κόσμος δεν θα αλλάξει ποτέ. But his return revives hopes of stability. The economy recovered modestly, and diplomatic relations with Turkey were normalized through the Greco-Turkish Friendship Treaty of 1930. But the Republic's institutions remained fragile. Elections were violent. No, the king still had his partisans. Governments were short-lived. Royalist propaganda was constant. And the army, even though modernized, was divided between the Venizelist and monarchical factions. And by 1932, global depression, Venizelos' electoral defeat had revived fears of a royal restoration. And Plastiras' position in this climate is a bit complex. He had become an emblem of Republican purity, courted by officers impatient with civilian politics. Intelligence reports from this period show his house in Athens visited nightly by captains and majors seeking guidance. He advised restraint, but he shared their anxiety that the People's Party, if victorious, would invite the king home. Here he is outside his home with members of his extended family. He was never married. He never had a family. He never needed to plunder the public purse in order to have ikopeda here and there, and he was never mentioned in the Panama Papers. With the elections of the 5th of March 1933 giving Saldaris' royalist coalition a parliamentary majority, the Republican network acted without full coordination. What did they do? On the 6th of March 1933, units loyal to Plastiras seized strategic points in Athens. If you don't believe me, there are the reports. Thessaloniki and Crete. And their stated aim was to protect the Republic against an imminent royalist coup. The uprising was badly organized, communications were poor, the navy remained neutral, and Venizelos refused to endorse military intervention. Within 48 hours, the government, supported by General Othonios and the loyal Air Force, regained control. Plastiras fled with a destroyer from Crete to Italy and then France. Here are his supporters on the streets of Athens. They did not last long. Here is Plastiras in France. A military court condemned him to death in absentia. The sentence was not carried out because there's no follow-through with Greeks. He lived in Marseille, supported by small stipends from expatriate Greeks who were sending him money so he can live. His correspondence doesn't reveal any remorse. He doesn't try and justify himself, but he concludes a republic cannot be guarded forever by soldiers. And possibly this acknowledgement of the limits of military virtue mark a turning point in his thought. I don't know. Somehow these all got mixed up because that's him when he's old. That's also him when he's old. His mustache has gone white, but we respect people with white mustaches even more than dark mustaches, I'm told. March 1935, senior Venizelist officers attempt another coup, proclaiming Plastiras head of state. He refuses to participate. Imagine. He's invited to take the reins of power, and he says, no thanks. Insisting from exile, he says to the soldiers, Greece needs legality, not another uprising. Are you seriously Greek? But the rebellion collapses. General Yorios Kondilis, another guy with a mustache, and a former Venizelist turned monarchist, crushes the uprising, executes several officers, and engineers the restoration of the monarchy. Venizelos and Plastiras are sentenced to death in absentia again. Venizelos dies in exile the following year. Plastiras remains isolated and impoverished in France, cut off for Greek politics for more than a decade. And his abstention from the 1935 revolt, though, gives him a sense of moral authority. Even monarchist newspapers conceded that he acted honourably. Foreign observers described him as the conscience of a lost republic. And it was during these years that he developed a belief that ultimately democracy must rest on reconciliation rather than vengeance, which had a very big insight into his, explains a lot about his thinking later on, because he makes a comeback. It's one of those people you can't keep down. He's in Greece during the Metaxas era, in France during the Metaxas era, and during the occupation. So he doesn't live through the occupation doesn't experience the German occupation in Greece. He's in France. And one of the interesting things about him is that many of the resistance groups who fought in Greece and were active during this time sought to place him or to refer to him for their own legitimacy. One of them was, no, this has all gone up the poo. I had a picture of Napoleon Zervas here, who founded EDES, which was the right-wing but Republican resistance group. Without asking Plastiras, they named him the political head of EDES, broadcasting his name to the Allies to attract supports from moderates and officers, just like the revolutionaries in 1821, Filiki Eteria, put the Tsar as the Anotatiarchi, even though the Tsar was against the revolution. You do this because you names drop and hope no one will take notice. But British officials did contact Plastiras in Marseille to confirm his endorsement. But he said, I will only endorse EDES if it refrains from civil conflict with other resistance groups. Fat chance. And he sends a telegram, I don't know how, on the 6th of August 1943 to the Greek government in exile in Cairo, saying he would lend moral authority to any movement whose aim is liberation and national unity. So it was not about taking sides, it was about restoring normality. His symbolic leadership lent EDES some credibility. He did not like Napoleon Zervas. He had met Zervas earlier. Zervas had the reputation of being a bit of a firebrand. He was picking fights. He was undisciplined. Didn't like him. But he through association, lent his group credibility. After the liberation of Greece, 1944, his name again surfaces in public as a potential head of a national government, and the reputation that he had of incorruptibility takes on a new meaning. He's no longer the black rider, or Mavros Kavalaris, but the elder soldier, whose moderation offers a bridge between extremes. This thing is interesting. Now, he returns to Greece at the end of the Second World War, and of course, Greece is already split down the middle. Yeah. The resistance has produced the two main forces, Eamelas, and the Republican but anti-communist EDES, which became monarchical because that was the only way that the Allies would continue supporting EDES. Zervas was an anti-monarchist who became a monarchist so he can, for funding purposes. The The British envoy, Reginald Leeper, writes in 44 that Plastiras' name commands respect. Along party lines, he's considered incorruptible, austere, moderate. Here he is returning to Athens. Here he is with the regent Archbishop Damaskinos. Plastiras was asked by him to return to Greece and form a government, and his aim was to stabilize the country after the Dekemvriana clashes of 1944, when British and Royalist troops fought the communist partisans in the capital. He assembled a cabinet of liberals, centrists, independents, trying to achieve national unity. His program was modest: restoration of law, food distribution with Allied assistance, release of all political prisoners, very important. 3 months of office, he sought to convert military victory into reconciliation. As a result, the British hated his guts and contrived to get rid of him. They considered that he was too soft on the communists. And he resigned. Here we go. He resigned, declaring that Greece needs tranquility more than it needs me, in April 45. So he was Prime Minister for 4 or 5 months, hardly anything. And the reason why he resigned, apart from the fact that Tavrike Skura, is because Damaskinos located a letter which he wrote while he was still in Marseille, which is a bit of a scandalous letter, because what he did was he wrote a letter stating that he was willing to broker a deal with the Germans if that would stop loss of life during the occupation and the various resistance groups stop fighting. I've got a copy here, but we've been going on for a while. If you like, you can have a look at it yourselves. But he wrote a letter which was very ill-advised, saying, you know what, if you want me to broker a deal with the Germans or whoever to stop the brutality, I'm more than happy to do that in service of my country. Damaskinos said, File, resign, or this is going to come out, and he resigned. That's a very serious lapse of judgment, I think. And his departure opened the way for a succession of fragile governments and eventually the Civil War, 46 to 49, because it's when the centre gives way that the extremes reign, and that's when you get the real chaos. Now, during the Civil War, he remains neutral but outspoken. He denounces the communist insurgency, so he's not a communist, but he also warned that the state's counter-terrorism, the white terror, was indistinguishable from vengeance, and that it was terror. The British and the American observers described him as a potential mediator, distrusted by both extremes. And his moral authority survived precisely because he refused to exploit it. Now, when the Civil War ends in 49, Greece is devastated. Country lays in ruins, 500,000 people were displaced, politics was exhausted, with the monarchy restored and foreign aid flooding in under the Marshall Plan. Greece needed stability more than ideology, and it was in this vacuum that Plastiras' reputation as an incorruptible moderate found new relevance. So in 49, he creates the National Progressive Centre Union, EPEC. Yeah, here he is with the EPEC, not OPEC, EPEC. Coalition of reformist Venizelists, moderate liberals, Democrats, independent veterans. EPEC's platform combined social welfare, moral reconstruction, land for the peasants, amnesty for political refugees. We're not about punishing anyone. Civil equality for refugees. Its slogan is a united and just Greece. Yeah, you remember before the Just Do It in the sport, the Adidas, we had Just Greece. You know what, we should claim royalties for that, but we're Republicans, so we can't. And that echoed his long-held conviction that peace requires equality and justice. Now, the elections of March 1950 create a fragmented parliament. EPEC, with 45 seats, gets the balance of power. Plastiras forms a coalition government with Sophocles Venizelos' liberals, on the 15th of April 1950, so he's back. And his second prime ministership is short but symbolically important. He reopens schools and hospitals. He abolishes emergency tribunals that was summary trying communists or people who were considered undesirable, and initiates a gradual release of political prisoners. More than 20,000 detainees, many held since the Civil War, are freed. And that does not make him very popular with hardline royalists, but earns him international praise among certain circles. One of the things his government does is implement austerity and seek closer integration with Western Europe. So in 1951, Greece joins the Organization for European Economic Cooperation and took early steps towards membership in NATO. Foreign observers describe him at this time as a democrat of the old school who governs with honesty and simplicity. There he is with the king. Elections in October 1951. Here he is with Sophocles Venizelos. Here he is signing the entry into the Organization for European Economic Cooperation. And then we come here to elections in October 1951. EPEC is returned as the largest party, 132 of 258 seats. Plastiras is over 70, and we know that traditionally you are not taken seriously as a Greek politician unless you are over 80. So mikros είναι ακόμα. Έχει δρόμο αυτός. The new government inherits an unstable economy, deeply polarized security apparatus, but his agenda is always reconciliation, normalize politics, reduce political persecution, balance sovereignty with Western alignment, which he believed was important. But the problem is that the Cold War tensions and the internal conservatism within Greece tests his ideals. The army, the palace, American mission demands unequivocal loyalty to the anti-communist bloc. There is no room for mediation. There is no room to temper the severity in this situation. Plastiras' attempts to liberalize internal security measures bring him in conflict with the army, still dominated by officers from the Civil War. So these are the tensions. And it's obviously a case where, as always in Greek politics, it's a game of chess where every second move is checkmate. And every single move is a bad move. And you don't have much of a field of movement. And there are the dilemmas inherent in this. But possibly the most tragic episode of the premiership was the trial and execution of Nikos Belogiannis. And we all know who he is. Yeah, communist organizer arrested in 1950 for supposedly operating an illegal network under the banned Communist Party. The first court-martial sentences him and 10 others to death. Plastiras, believing the evidence to be insufficient, refused to sign the execution orders and suspended implementation. He couldn't do it. He orders a re-examination of the case and hopes to replace capital punishment with imprisonment. And obviously this decision drew outrage from royalist circles, conservative press, which accused him of betraying the fallen of Gramos. And under mounting pressure from the military leadership, the monarchy, and surprise, surprise, the American embassy, a second trial opens in February 1952, focusing exclusively on espionage charges, and it ends again in death sentences. The king's advisor and Ambassador John Purifoy, from which the word puerile comes, urges Plastiras not to interfere, warning that clemency would signal weakness. And Plastiras' health is failing. He's an old man. He's tired. He sought again to postpone the executions until after the elections scheduled later that year. His appeal is rejected by the cabinet's defense minister and the military court. So at dawn, on the 30th of March 1952, Belogiannis, the three other co-defendants, Kalivas, Argiriou, Lazaridis, were executed at Roudi. Plastiras didn't sign the death order, but he accepted political responsibility for allowing the decision to stand. And his brief parliamentary statement of the 2nd of April 1952 acknowledges the tragedy without self-justification. The law took its course, he said. My heart did not. It's very brave words to say during this time. International reaction was immediate. Protests in Paris, Rome, London, Pablo Picasso, who sketched Belouyanis, Jean-Paul Sartre joined in appeals for clemency. Plastiras, safe to say, devastated. It was the collapse of his moral vision that he had pursued ever since 1922. A man who had founded his politics on mercy, found himself presiding over an act of retribution which he opposed but could not prevent. By mid-1952, Sophocles Venizelos withdrew from the coalition. Elections in November returned a sweeping conservative victory under Field Marshal Papagos. Plastiras resigns in 1952, retires to his modest apartment in Kypseli, refusing any pension beyond his army stipend. So he didn't get a parliamentary pension, he didn't have parliamentary super. He died on the 26th of July 1953, leaving no property, and that is his funeral right there. The government declares a day of mourning. Thousands filed past his coffin, some to make sure that he was dead, others visibly moved at the Metropolitan Cathedral. Newspapers that had once opposed him now called him a man who governed without self-interest, because we know this about Greeks. When we're dead, everyone praises us. Yeah? His funeral gathered representatives of all the factions, all of whom praised him as a man of moderation and integrity. Now, the first public commemorations appeared swiftly in 1955. The plain of Tavropos in Thessalia becomes Limni Plastira, yeah? Honors the general from Karditsa and associates him with national reconstruction and moral probity. By 1960s, portraits of Plastiras hung in schools, veterans' halls beside those of Venizelos and Kolokotronis. I have some vague memories when I was a young boy going to Greek school of Plastiras' portrait in one of our classrooms. So there you go. Didn't write, here he is with Papagos, here he is with a statue named in his honor. So, yes, cultural portrayals of him. There are folk ballads written about him, Karditsa Evritania, celebrating Ton Mavro Cavallari, Kostas Varnalis, Stratis Mirivilis, portrayed him as a stoic soldier, and his name became synonymous with integrity. You hear old Greeks saying at the time, if Plastiras was alive, this would not happen. Like we say, this wouldn't happen if Gough Whitlam was still Prime Minister. Αυτοί λέγανε το Plastira. Kemal Atatürk remarked to him back in the day, I gave gold and you gave me copper, talking about the population exchange and the way that it was handled by Plastiras. That's apocryphal. We don't know if it's true, but what we do know, oh, here we go, my son's done his orthographia all over my notes. He is that symbol of incorruptibility. He's that archetypal democrat. And again, I close with the dilemma. Can a man of disciplined conscience truly be considered a democrat if he finds it necessary to impose the conditions for democracy by military might? I'll leave that to you, thanking you all for your attention, struggling through all of this. Thanks.
Τι να πω, Κωνσταντίνη, excellent presentation. So, hope you don't regret I made you do it. So,
absolutely not. I find him fascinating.
Any questions from the audience? I might just kickstart the questions. When he was in France, in Marseille, that was the time of Vichy France as well.
That's right.
Does he comment about that state of affairs at all during Vichy France, or in his letters? Or?
He's very, very, very careful. So we don't have any comments, but what we have is this really, really damning letter where he castigates Metaxas, and we've got time to read it out, 2 seconds.
Yeah.
When the ineptitude of the foreign policy of the 4th of August led the Greek people into an unequal war with a great power such as Italy, I cast into oblivion all bitterness and did whatever depended upon me for the success of the struggle. Sufficient condemnation of this is my appeal to Greeks of America, as well as an interview of mine. From the beginning of the war with Italy, my anxieties were great, and despite the local victories of the Greek army in the Albanian mountains, I foresaw the disastrous consequences of a misguided policy, and above all the absence of capable direction of military operations. The arrogance of the men of the decayed regime of 4th of August, he didn't like Metaxas, revived by the fighting arm of the Greek soldier, exceeded every limit. Their blindness was such that they rejected numerous offers to participate in the struggle from a number of other officers. At the end of November 1940, I was reliably informed that there existed grounds for a settlement of the Italo-Greek conflict through the mediation of Germany. I did whatever was possible in such a case so that Greece might benefit from this opportunity, yet the hostile attitude towards me and towards the regime in general, and also of the Vichy embassy, rendered my personal intervention impossible. I sent my closest friend, Mr. Piromarlu, who was Zervas' second in command, to make contact with the embassy and to inform them of this most important matter, but he was received in an extremely unfavourable manner by the embassy councillor, who was a Metaxas hack. Later in January and February, the danger was evident. Anxious to the point of despair, I wanted to go to Egypt. Friends of mine there acted through the British authorities so that my passage might be facilitated, but again, the goodwill of the British encountered the categorical demand of the Metaxas government that I may not be permitted to set foot on Egyptian soil. So the whole idea is that there must have been some kind of modus vivendi with Vichy, that I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone, because he was not arrested, he did not suffer under that regime, and I think that was because he had tried to mediate. Now, you can see that any way, which way you will. I mean, that's also the dilemma of Tzolakoglu and the early collaborationist prime ministers of Greece under the Germans, who Tzolakoglu, for example, said that I did it because I wanted to temper the barbarity of the Germans, and I thought that by working with them, I would protect the people from their barbarity. Do you do that? Do you sacrifice yourself? Or do you insist on zero collaboration? It is a dilemma. Yeah, I haven't consulted the constitution of the Greek community recently, but I'm pretty sure that those names are not allowed to be spoken in this room. Yeah.
There must be some questions. You use an inquisitive lot.
Not anymore. We have removed all questions and queries and otherwise moral dilemmas from.
Τι πάθατε σήμερα?
It's okay, they've had enough.
You've...
About who? Oh, I'm sure a lot of them did, and most of them sponsored reactionary coups. I point you gently in the direction of Plato and his ideal republic, yeah? A lot of fun. He didn't like poets. He wanted to ban all poetry, Plato. That's why he and I parted ways a long time ago.
Surely there must be a question or two.
Someone tell me I was wrong. And that ChatGPT should be checked before it reduces information, or Google, or whatever it is. Grok. Imagine if we run this by Grok and it was, what's his name? Who's that guy? The one that runs Grok. Musk, Elon Musk, feeding us information about Plastiras and how military might should be tempered by mercy. That's not going to go down well, is it?
Did Plastira have a lot to do or contact with Kemal Ataturk at all?
There was a bit, because obviously they were working out the population exchange at the time. And that's where Kemal was said to have said, I gave you gold, you gave me copper, I gave you the most productive elements of Turkish society, and you gave me people who were not that skilled. It is a widely spoken remark and attributed to Ataturk. I don't believe it. I don't think Ataturk would have said something like that. But you never know. But they did. And also, I mean, supporting Venizelos' vision of the Greco-Turkish Friendship Treaty, which I think is a very important treaty, because it guaranteed security for Greece and the ability to reconstruct, which we wasted with coups and civil wars and all of that. There would have been that contact with, if not Atatürk himself, certainly high-ranking members of his regime.
And when the EPEC was the largest party when he came to the elections, I think it said 1951, where were their supporters mainly from? Like which regions of Greece? Where did they have a strong presence?
You would be really, really, really surprised to know that Thessalia was one of those regions that supported Plastiras. But it really was regions that traditionally supported the Venizelos regimes, because he was not tarred by that brush, but obviously had collaborated with Venizelos, was known to be a Venizelos supporter.
Yeah. And you mentioned a few times he was into agrarian reform as well.
Agrarian reform.
And Greece is still very rural.
Yeah. But also there were monarchists who traditionally supported agrarian reform as well. And you know that up in the north, it wasn't stable. There were the traditional landholders in Macedonia who supported the monarchists.
Royalists.
And then there were the Venizelos who wanted land distribution. And then there were the Venizelos who didn't get the land distribution, so they went further to the left. So it's a complex, ever-evolving political scheme. And you also need to take account his own movement and intellectual development, which influenced his politics. He started from somewhere, but his trajectory took him somewhere else. And how much of your trajectory is defined by you saying, this is who I am, as opposed to other people defining you and saying, no, this is what you are. For example, the fact that he was considered unreliable by the Maskinos, who engineered his downfall, and by the Americans and the British, who couldn't stand him because they considered him to be too soft. It's the tragedy of the person who's in the middle, trusted by no one.
Is that a hand up or you're just stretching? Sorry.
So
I'm just trying to work out, was he more popular when he was ruling or afterwards when people could appreciate his legacy?
Well, this is the thing. Because he came and went, he had periods of popularity. But Greece has always been, at least past 100 years or so, a polarized society. So it's one of those things, you either love him or hate him. But there was that popular belief that love him or hate him, he had integrity. And I mean, he died just after resigning from office the last time, losing those elections. So it's one of those things where it wasn't about, well, you're now retired gracefully and you're an elder statesman and you're given the chance to reinvent yourself like Malcolm Fraser. He died. And then the world moved on, and then we had all the crises after that. You had Karamanlis and his reconstruction, you had the military coup, you had the invasion of Cyprus. The world moved on.
Dean, what was his relationship like with Giorgos Papandreou?
He worked with him. You would have seen in one of the photos that he was in his cabinet. And I mean, Papandreou was a Venizelos. He was a lieutenant of Venizelos. They worked closely together. They all come from the same ideological faction. But politics is politics. And you find Plastiras in one camp, Sophocles Venizelos in another camp. You will remember that Konstantinos Mitsotakis Senior was part of the Giorgos Papandreou government πριν από την αποστασία. So we are friends one day, and then the next day we no longer talk to each other and we persecute each other, or we compete with each other and combine when it suits us to do so. I mean, it's that το ρευστό της ελληνικής πολιτικής σκηνής. That's right, yeah.
Apparently, it's claimed to Zakariadi and Papandreou. I don't know if that's the case, but apparently both of them used that phrase. So I was wondering what is that
Look,
the case?
we don't know who used the phrase, and obviously that has more to do with power and who wields it, and the fact that certain things don't change. Υπάρχουν κάποιες σταθερές in a government and in politics. I actually thought I was really smart because I thought I made up ti Plastiras, ti Papavos. I was going around the house saying it while I was writing this, and no, they had said it 100 years, 50 years before. So yeah, there you go. Maybe they both said it. I know Zachariadis didn't have a really great sense of humour. I'd be more inclined to think it was Papandreou.
Sorry, I don't know your name. Julia?
Tell us more about his family life.
Δεν είχε οικογενειακή ζωή, δεν παντρεύτηκε. He never got married. He never had children. There was not even the hint of a mistress. This is bizarre. Was he gay? Κάτσε να τον φέρω πίσω στο προσκήνιο. Κάτσε, πού είμαστε.
Did he have godchildren?
Ήθελα να φέρω τη φωτογραφία του because I wanted to say, try telling him that. He was a very macho man. His sexuality has never been I actually had that question. I wanted to look it up. There's not been a suggestion that he was a sexual man. He may have been asexual. That happens. He may have sublimated that in the service of his country. But he did look after his mum. He did look after his relatives. But not to the extent that other Greek politicians do, που τους βολεύουν με θεσούλες, με το ένα με το άλλο. He didn't do any of that. He was incorruptible, which means probably his family after a while, his extended family probably thought, ας τον εκεί πέρα, δεν θα φάμε από αυτόν. Which is why he died alone.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I think we might bring proceedings to a close. Thank you very much, Dean. That was an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Nico. And
we'll have you back again.
can I please ask you to be here on Tuesday for Dr. Themistoklis Kritikakos' launch of his amazing book about the way that the genocide is considered in Australia. It's a very important book. Please be here. He's a great scholar and it's a great achievement. So please be here for that.
Okay. Hope to see you all next Tuesday. Okay, bye.